Hi, you're listening to the Build Your Digital Community podcast. I'm your host, Kristina Bartold, the co-founder and co-CEO of The Social Snippet, a social media agency focused on business owners growing their digital communities. On this podcast, we'll talk about all things digital community building so that you can grow your network and ultimately your business.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of Build Your Digital Community. I'm your host, I'm Kristina, and I am so freaking stoked to be here for two reasons. One, Maria's here.
Yay.
And we're in Arizona filming again, which has been such a gift for us to get to do this in person. And we now think we're going to do this all the time. Like, we're trying to figure out a way to make this a regular part of our routine.
Your living room might become a podcast studio soon.
My living room, yeah, maybe. My dog might not like that, but and I'm so excited to have a mentor here who when I think of you, Lindsey, I think of you as the ultimate community builder. And I know whenever anybody talks about building community in the online space and how you show up in person, like, community comes to mind. So, Lindsey, thanks so much for being here.
Yay! I'm so excited to be here.
Lindsey, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself? And what I'm most excited to hear from you is kind of how you got into, like, building community and that being such a big pillar of like, your business and your life.
So I feel like, being from the Midwest, I feel like community is just in my DNA. Like, I had a very like community-based upbringing where we were really close with our neighbors, and I just feel like I brought that into my business life, partially because, and when I talk about like the growth of Powerhouse Women, part of why I really built it around community was that I knew that I don't have all the answers. And I knew that I wasn't looking to be some guru. I knew that, like, my best strength was being able to bring really brilliant people together and putting a spotlight on them. And I think it was important for the people that I want to serve, which are women who are building businesses or up to big things, to see that, okay, I can be powerful, and I am powerful, but I'm powerful in what I know, and I'm so willing to say what I don't know or what I'm not good at. And it just ended up growing this organic community, yes, but I think it's so much bigger than that. It's a mission that really shows us all that we don't have to have it all together. In a space where, at least when I started building Powerhouse Women, it was the era of social media being very much the curated, very perfect, very like, I've got to show only the good side in order to make an impact on people. And I was looking for more of like the real, authentic conversations, because we all know this is not always cute. I'm literally sitting here with a tissue in my hand, a snotty mess, and you're being so gracious because I'm getting over a cold. And, you know, it's like some days are just harder than others. And I really do believe that it's important to share that side of it even more than the parts that are inspiring and aspirational. So community to me was always kind of like built into my DNA. And Powerhouse Women specifically was inspired by wanting to share more of like that real, authentic side of the story, because I was just kind of craving it, you know? I wanted to like see the woman who's crushing it, but like I want to hear her talk about the last time she ugly cried because she didn't know what she was doing.
I think that's so important and so brave of you to like be such a leader in that space, because there's so much pressure on us as women to be like, look, I have it all together, my makeup's perfect and my hair is perfect and I've never cried a day in my life and everything's great. And to like break through that barrier and challenge that, and to be like, actually, I ugly cried 10 times yesterday and like, I'm still a boss ass bitch. Like, that is so powerful. So I'm just so inspired by you in that way. And I think it's just what we've seen, and we've started kind of putting together some dinners for women and stuff like that, and hosting some smaller events. So much magic happens when women come together and are just vulnerable and honest, and like, it's so crazy the magic that happens when people get in the room. So I'm curious from you, like, what do you think is that magic? Like, what comes from that for you?
Okay, well, you said something so powerful that I think is really the key. It's as women especially, I think our vulnerability is our superpower, because if we really want to get into it, it's like, as a society, we're literally taught from a young age through what's in the media, through advertisements, we're literally taught to look at the world through a lens of I'm not enough. But yet we're equally afraid to show that side because we don't want to admit that we don't have it all together, when no one does. It's like, logically we know that. We know that no one else has it all together. There's literally not one person on the planet, I don't care how much money they have, I don't care what their life looks like on social media, we all have struggles. And it's the struggles that actually unite us. Like, that's the part that bonds people together, if you think about it. it's knowing that maybe someone went through a tough situation that you've been through, and you feel supported, you feel less alone, you feel like there's hope. So why wouldn't we create a culture where, I think it's both, because then on the other side, there's, I think, this belief, at least in the women who I've mentored, that we have to show that we've struggled in order to feel worthy of the success. So it's kind of like this balance of allowing ourselves to be just as powerful and confident in the things that we rock at, and honest about the things that we don't, or the things that we failed at. I think it's really important that we show the next generation of people who are watching us both sides, because I don't believe that either one in itself, like just being vulnerable and just sharing your challenges, I also think that leaves a part out, because we have to be able to also show that, okay, in spite of those challenges, there's actually a tremendous power. But it also, for me at least, when I share it, like when I share the vulnerabilities, they don't have power over me anymore. I don't feel, it's like, great, who's gonna come at me online and say like, oh, you're so insecure, if I'm like, I know, I just did a whole podcast on my insecurity. Like, what else do you want to say?
Yeah.
It literally takes the power away when we can just share openly from a standpoint of like, yeah, this is something I'm still working on. And how cool is it that I can still get up and have a podcast and speak in front of people, and I still go home sometimes and I don't feel like I'm good enough. I think that's beautiful, and I think that's so much more relatable than either sharing only the struggles or only the successes.
Something you said really resonated there, and it's interesting because I didn't think that the conversation would go here, but one of the things I've been thinking a lot about is I've been getting a lot of requests lately to speak. Like, people have been asking me to do like workshops and stuff like that. And so I was talking to a friend and a client who's like a public speaking coach, and the initial like thing I have on this is I don't feel like worthy to speak because I don't think anything traumatic enough has happened to me. And it sounds like such a weird thing to say out loud, that it's like, I don't have the rise that everyone else does, you know, like my parents are still together, like I have a university education, like, you know, I lived like a really great life. And so I didn't feel like I had the trauma to overcome something to talk about it in a meaningful way. And it's just something that's kind of coming up for me right now, that I'm like, oh, that's interesting, that I've never thought about that as like, that can be such a barrier.
Yeah, I remember this was like early on in my personal development journey. I went to this seminar, and a lot of people were opening up about like very traumatic things that have happened. And I remember feeling almost like what people will talk about with like survivor's guilt of like going through something that maybe others didn't survive and they did. I started to feel this weird sense of guilt or like that I couldn't make as big of an impact either if I hadn't been through certain things. But you know, at the end of the day, I do believe that there's purpose in everything we do go through. And I remember when my first book was about to come out, I even had someone ask me that. They kind of said in a very loving way, it wasn't meant to be like a put down, like, oh, I didn't know that you'd really been through anything. Like, you know, it's significant to be able to like talk about. And I was like, well, that's interesting, because I used to think that too, but a lot of my challenges have been self-imposed. And I think that's the thing, that no matter what we've been through or not, the mindset stuff is often, it's a barrier for everyone in different degrees. So starting to look at, okay, well, you're right. I also come from a family where my parents are still married. I had like a very loving upbringing. I'm so fortunate in that. But I also, you know, have had a lot of internal struggles with my own confidence and with my own overachieving nature, never feeling like I was quite doing enough. So there's something in every single one of our stories that people can learn from. It would be so boring if we all had the same story.
Totally.
But I had that exact same, I guess, like limiting belief or doubt that I had anything that I could share with people. Because I have a similar story, it sounds like, with not really having a lot of the, you know, just a lot of like the bigger traumas, the big T traumas to overcome, at least until this point in my life.
And what made you so passionate about the mindset pieces?
You know, I don't know. I really don't know. I think there's just certain things that like we are drawn to.
Yeah.
And this is kind of like a silly story, but like my first taste of personal development was in college. I had this relationship that was like so not a healthy relationship. It was like a lot of like, we broke up, we'd get back together. It was a lot of emotional manipulation. Now looking back, it wasn't intended to be harmful, but I just remember, like, on the other side of one of the breakups, who knows which one it was, I just was seeking something that gave me a feeling of more control over my emotion. And essentially what I was looking to build was like my emotional intelligence, to not be so reactive and not give so much power to someone and whether or not they liked me at the moment. And some of the first personal development books I read were like Dr. Phil relationship books. It's so funny looking back now, but what it started to give me was like this feeling that like, oh, I do have a say in how I feel. It started to give me that. I know there's like this very cliche saying in personal development, like, oh, it didn't happen to me, it happened for me. That's all great. It's great to put like that on a coffee mug. But when you're in it and you're like, no, right? You're like, you're just broken up with or someone cheated on you, you're like, no, that definitely happened to me.
Yeah.
It's like easy to say, but I think it started to give me a feeling that I hadn't had before. And I became just like very interested, and then I went from there to like in my first job I was on the road a lot, and I remember Success Magazine used to have these CDs that came in the magazine, and it would have different interviews, and I would listen to those on my road trips. I just was so hungry to like learn about how successful people thought and how they operated. It just was like an obsession, like the same way people are obsessed with reality TV or, you know, get really interested in different things. For me, it was always like I had that first taste of what it felt like to really be in control of how I wanted to feel, even in the midst of things that were challenging at the time. You know, now I look back and it seems so silly because that was definitely not the relationship for me. But at the time, it's like heartbreak. It's like your first heartbreak, your first sense of like, oh wait, someone chose someone else over me. Like that's a whole other world to you know, to deal with as a young woman, especially. So yeah, I don't get to share that story that often about like how I found personal development, but I'm so grateful for it, right? I wonder if I would have eventually found my way there, but
happened for you, Lindsey.
I guess it happened for me.
Dr. Phil happened for you. Yeah.
It happened for you.
Well, I'm curious for you, Lindsey, too, like, so as you've, and I know a little bit about your backstory, but I'm curious, like, for you, how did you get into like building community? Like what were kind of your first steps? Because I know that that's something, you know, like we're connected with Chris and Lori as well, and that's something that comes up all the time in their business advice is like, you know, build community, like have like networking events, do these things, and it can be really intimidating for people. Like we got started and we've been really lucky, like they've kind of taken off and have like a little bit of a life of their own, and they're like the people at our networking events are like becoming friends and giving each other business. Like it's great. But the first one was scary. I was like, what if no one comes?
Very scary.
Like what if we rent this place and, you know, you and I are eating Italian food alone? Like what are we gonna do? So I'm curious for you, like how did you get kind of like the ball rolling on building that community?
So I feel super fortunate because my first business venture was in network marketing, which is very much team building centered. So I think that really taught me about like the power of building a team and essentially a community around an idea. And I learned I was really good at it, you know? And as part of that business, I started joining different networking groups in Phoenix. At that time, you know, there was no Powerhouse Women. There's so many amazing groups now, but none of that existed. So I would go to like Chamber of Commerce, and I was quite literally like the youngest person there. Or I joined like BNI groups.
Me in a BNI group right now.
Exactly. And I loved it. I was like, of course, that I had to be BNI president for like 3 years. But what I noticed was missing was that I had friends who were nurses, and they were craving community, but they didn't need to go to a BNI group. They weren't looking for like referrals for more sick people.
Yeah.
They were looking for opportunities to connect. So I've shared this story a little bit before, maybe you two have heard it, but I started to just host these lunches. I called them Ladies Who Lunch. And I rented a room at a restaurant very similar, and I just put out a Facebook invite, and I was like, you know, this is like, I think I even like made a play on how BNI felt like not stuffy, and you know, no offense to BNI, but I very much put together like what I was looking for. And sometimes 5 people showed. There was definitely one time that no one showed, and I ate alone, and it actually wasn't that bad.
Yeah.
Like that's the thing. You have that one. Anyone who's listening to this that wants to build community, don't be so afraid of that. Because you have that one time that no one shows. It's a great story for later.
Yeah.
I remember the sweet waiter. He was all of maybe, you know, like mid-20s, and he was, I think, having a harder time with it than I was. And I was like, it's fine, dude. Like, I'm still going to eat lunch. You know, I'm here.
Ravioli.
Exactly. I was like, I actually very much enjoy my own company.
Yeah.
Because it wasn't, what I noticed in that moment is, I was like, oh, this isn't a reflection on me.
Yes.
People are busy. They have things come up. I think it was like our December meeting. So it was like the holidays. Mm-hmm. I was like, oh, it's not that big of a deal because it's not personal. Mm-hmm. So I'm so grateful for that experience because I led those for maybe a year or a little bit more. And then when my book was about to come out, which I did like a hybrid self-publish, so I was the one marketing my book. I didn't have a team behind me, anything like that. My editor/publisher, the company that helped me put it out, she said, you should do a book launch event. So this was kind of on the heels of doing these lunches and getting women together. And I was like, well, an event all about me sounds terrible. Like that, I just remember like, well, exactly, but like my bridal shower where everyone just like watches you open gifts. Yes. Like that is painful. It's like torture. Yeah. Like, oh, the towels I registered for. How excited can I really be about? I knew I was getting these towels. Yeah. So I had like a little bit of like a hard time being in the spotlight, if you will. Mm-hmm. And I was like, that just doesn't feel to me representative of what the book is actually about anyway. But what if we did an event where we had more of these conversations and talked about the struggles? And I brought some of my entrepreneur friends together and I was like, cool, like I guess we'll do a little event, just little event. And, that went on to inspire this whole community, now it's an annual event. But at that time, and a lot of people don't know this, it was never meant to be more than just that one little book launch event that maybe 25 people came to.
Wow. Mm-hmm. And so I'm curious because you create such a safe space where everyone feels so comfortable to like be themselves, be vulnerable, share their struggles, and that's not easy, right? And often we walk into rooms and that's not the feeling. So I'd love to hear more about like what you've done to create that vibe and how you kind of role model that yourself too.
Well, I mean, that's honestly is like the biggest compliment ever to receive because that was the intention from the start. And knowing that it was the intention, I knew that I had to go first. So if anyone's ever been to like one of the Powerhouse Women events, I will forever always kind of be the opening piece because it's really important to set that tone from the beginning, even for the other speakers. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And what's so cool and I think is so beautiful is now so much of like the community who's been around for a while, like listening to the podcast for a while or have been to other events, they get to become a part of that. So together we set the tone for everyone else who's coming in kind of brand new or not familiar with this whole Powerhouse Women world. And you can feel it. It really is different. And so part of it I know is intentional, but I know there's like a sprinkle of some magic that I don't even know that I can explain in words, but it just really comes from who I am and what I was looking for all those years ago in finding this blend of inspiration but authenticity that I just wasn't finding at the time. And I do think we do a good job of it. There's so many other organizations that do too, but I think that's what makes it so special is, like I was saying in the beginning, it's like the aspirational side of what entrepreneurship can be or what it can really look like to fulfill your purpose, but realizing that, listen, we all have like such embarrassing, cringeworthy moments still. It just normalizes it, right? And then you don't get stuck in those. Mm-hmm. So when it happens, you're like, oh, okay. I forever have thought like there should be some sort of like a Girl Scout badge system, right? So like when you have your first event and no one shows, it's like you get a badge.
Yeah, totally.
Or like you're just moving up in the ranks now. Yeah. So we'll have to, we'll work on that.
And I think too, something I really appreciate about you, Lindsey, is like your energy and like how you show up. And I think different people attract different people, right? And so I think that that's an amazing thing for people to think about as they're building their communities, is that something I always get caught up with when I think about things. I'm like, well, somebody else is already like running events. There's already somebody else who's running events. Like there's already someone else who's doing dinners, but there's people who are going to be attracted to like your energy. So even one of my clients, I actually met her through Girl Gang. And her and I were on the phone the other day and we were chatting and she said, oh, I'm looking for my next like big room to join. And I was telling her a little bit about Chris Harder's Roundtable. And I was like, oh, you should think about that. And she was like, oh, it's too close to Powerhouse Women. And like, I'm obsessed with Lindsey and I like love being in Lindsey's energy. And like, I'm definitely going to go to that. So like that would come second kind of thing. But it's amazing.
Sorry, Chris.
Yeah, sorry. Chris listens to this and hears that. Fair enough. You know what I mean? But Yeah, but I think it's just one of those things where we have this like love and this energy for people. I love Chris, but Maria's like super into Lori, right? And like we both have our different people that we're like attracted to.
Yeah.
And so I think when people are thinking about building community, it's so easy to be like, oh, like someone else is doing it, or no, what if nobody comes or whatever. But remembering that there's people who are going to want to just be in your energy.
Yes. And that there will literally be people that, I'm just saying you philosophically, talking to all of us in the room, but also you listening, there will be people that if you don't share your story, they're not going to get their breakthrough. Like, it's easy to think like, well, okay, if I just was like Kristina, if I was just like really well spoken like her, had high energy like her, then I could make a big impact. Someone might need to hear it through a different lens in terms of life experience, or through someone who's just delivers it in a different way. And that was hard for me to accept. When I was writing my book, I was really in it, like the imposter syndrome of like, literally, who am I to be doing this? I have no business whatsoever. And I had a lot of evidence for that. But to realize that, I mean, there were 3 distinct times that I tried to quit. It wasn't like I thought about it. No, I had all the ammunition. I was like ready to quit the process of not write my book. Powerhouse Women wouldn't exist. I know that there are people who wouldn't maybe be having the experience they're having or had the breakthrough that they had if I hadn't kept going. And that, to me, it just fuels my fire even more to make sure the next woman doesn't give up, because there will be people who can't hear it from me the same way they'll hear it from you.
And if you think about it too, the events you run, like, and the way that you show up, like, there's people out there who have met their best friend sitting at Powerhouse Woman, or like have had a major breakthrough through even a podcast. Like, so many people I find, even with podcasting, they're so scared to get started. And they're like, well, who's going to listen to me? Like, what if 5 people download it? And I'm like, what if you change 5 people's lives? Like, would that feel worth it to you? Would that hour a week feel impactful enough if you change 5 people's lives? And these things take time. And that's why I was going to ask you this when we were chatting outside. And I was like, no, I can't ask you this, because I'm going to ask you and you're going to drop gold and I'm not going to have it recorded. But I'm curious for you, when you were getting your podcast started, because I know there's a lot of like aspiring podcasters who listen, I'm sure your numbers didn't look the way that they look today. Like, how did you continue the momentum and like continue to give yourself that evidence that that's something that you should keep doing, so that you can keep that free bacon?
I mean, the free bacon is a big part of it.
For
sure. I was telling Kristina how my husband, who started his podcast 3 weeks ago, well, when he made this request, got a sponsor that sent him free bacon. So let this be all of our lesson. You're never too soon in the process to ask for free bacon. But here's something really important that I realized as you were asking that. I didn't look at the numbers for over 2 years.
Wow.
I didn't look at them at all.
Wow.
Because that wasn't why I was doing it, and that would have gotten in my head. So actually, Danny Hafelman was my podcast producer at the time, and I remember he was, because I used to record all the episodes in person, he would come to my house. He literally, I credit myself for him leaving his job because, in part, because he just had to listen to me sit there every week and talk about, like, entrepreneurship and all these things. But I remember one day he said to me something about like where our numbers were, and I was like, oh, it occurred to me that I hadn't even thought about it. Because to me, the podcast was a pure marketing play. I knew I was investing in getting our message out there, and still to this day, the podcast is the #1 place that we get new community members. People will fly across the country solo to come to the Powerhouse Women event, not knowing anyone. Which I say that in such an emphatic tone because I'm like, I don't know that I would do that. Because they listened to the podcast. So I knew that it was the long game. So I didn't even worry about the numbers for the first couple of years. And even still, like, I looked at them today and I was like, oh, that's interesting. And then I just go back to creating content that is meaningful to me. But to me, what I looked at was the one person who would reach out to me in the DMs saying, and I'll never forget the day. It was like in a week I had gotten a message from someone in Ghana, Africa.
Wow. And
a message from someone in Malaysia. Like you said, if I was just doing a podcast for those 2 women who might never have a chance to come to Arizona to be a part of a Powerhouse Women event, I would still be doing podcasts for them. So that's how I kept myself going. And I really think for most podcasters, you shouldn't even bother looking at the numbers for the first year. Just get in the routine of being consistent, put out great content, ask your community, even if it, your Instagram community, wherever you can get feedback, ask them what they want to hear. And if you really put your heart into making great content, it's going to take off. But yeah, I still today don't really look at the numbers.
Wow.
That is so
Should
cool.
I?
No.
No.
That's so much.
Like maybe I'm missing something. But I think what's so cool is that even our like small podcast in the beginning, I'll never forget. It was 2019. We started the podcast in April. September was our live event that year. And it was the first year we did our pajamas and Prosecco kickoff party. So it was a pretty small group. It was maybe like 50 people. And I'm working the room, going and saying hi to everybody. And there was this woman I walked up to. I still remember exactly what she looks like. And she had braided pigtails in her hair, because we do all these fun like beauty lounge installations. So she just had her hair braided. And I was like, hi, I'm Lindsey. And she's like, oh my gosh, I'm Emily. And I said, where are you from? We just strike up this conversation. She's like, oh, I'm from New York. And I was like, New York? And she's like, yeah, like New York State, like right outside of New York City. And I was like, awesome. Like, how'd you find out about this? She said, from the podcast. I said, well, who did you come with? And she goes, oh, no one. I just came by myself because I heard about it on the podcast. To me, again, this was months after starting the podcast. So we maybe had a couple thousand downloads, if that. I don't know because I didn't look. But to me, that was the evidence that I needed. People were finding out about Powerhouse Women who may not have otherwise found out about it. And so I was in. I was hooked. I was hooked before that, but that was just the evidence that I needed to keep going. So then I would imagine I was talking to Emily when I was, recording podcasts. And I think if you know why you're doing it, and unless you're literally trying to be like the biggest podcaster in the world, which even if you are, that's amazing, it's a long game.
Yeah.
Then I think the numbers are just like a fraction of what matters.
Thanks so much for sharing that, because something that I always talk about on this podcast is like, I feel like podcasting is like 50% for the listener and 50% for you, where you get to have these amazing conversations and you get to like build your network and build your community with like-minded people who you would never get to talk to like one-on-one, right? Like, you're so busy, and I'm not going to reach out to you and be like, Lindsey, will you have coffee with me, right? But like, this is an opportunity for us to learn like from you in this space and get to share it with a larger audience too. And that's so impactful. And like, I think like the numbers in a lot of ways do come second, but I feel like in business we're so obsessed with like followers and like, does this exact piece of my business give an ROI? And podcasting is such a long game, but then when done properly, I think can have the biggest impact.
Huge. It's huge. And that's the part that I tell people about too, is the relationships I've been able to build, the people I've been able to have a 1-hour conversation with that for sure are not just going to get on Zoom with me just to chat. But when you're giving them a platform, no matter how big that platform is, you'd be surprised. We were just talking before we turned on the microphones, right? Of like, you had this list of people you really wanted to have on, and now you're going to need a bigger list, right?
Yeah, I know.
It is.
Right.
It's valuable.
Yeah.
It's super valuable. And I don't take it lightly at all when someone asks me to be on their podcast. That's them saying, I want to share my people with you.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a big honor. So if you have a podcast, if you are interviewing people, it's just such a beautiful way to build relationships. Yeah, it's one of my favorite parts about it.
Lindsey, I need to know, and I wasn't expecting to ask you this, but I need to know, if you could interview someone for your podcast tomorrow.
Ooh.
And it's like someone, you have no idea how you get in contact with them. Like, it could be anybody. It could be Harry Potter. Like, it could be anybody.
Okay, so the only celebrity I would ever care to have like a conversation with, it's not an Oprah, it's not a Sarah Blakely.
I thought it was an Oprah.
Like, don't get me wrong. If Oprah called me and said like, hey, I'd really like to be on your podcast, Will Ferrell.
What?
I feel like I would love to... that just says everything you need to know about me. It's just like everything that I love is about being weird, having a good time. So Will Ferrell. It's just my honest answer. You know who else I really look up to when it comes to building community is Taylor Swift. I think
I'm in literal shock.
Oh, really? Okay,
Taylor Swift.
let's go there. Let's go there. So we, in Team Powerhouse, we have a term that we have coined, the Taylor Swift effect. Okay. Hear me out, because this is all about building community.
Yes.
Your faces right now.
I'm not as shocked as Kristina. She has a mob.
Okay, yeah. I know Taylor's a mob. I'm still on Will Ferrell. Like, I'm.
Oh my gosh, I am like an OG Will Ferrell fan from like SNL days. I have like, they used to produce these DVDs that were like the best of skits. I have the whole Will Ferrell volumes. Yeah, I'm like fan.
We've learned
Fangirl.
something.
Yes.
Okay, sorry, the Taylor Swift effect.
So, but Taylor Swift, and what's funny is, so I didn't like even try to buy tickets to the concert. I'm a fan from afar, but I love to study how she creates community. And what she specifically does really well is, for someone who's got such a large reach, you watch her make individual people feel seen. And that's ultimately what building community is built on, because so I'm never going to be able to have like a personal interaction with every single person who listens to the podcast or follows our social media. And that part used to like actually keep me up at night, because I know that my calling is to build a larger community. How large, I don't know, but I'm just kind of going with it.
Yeah.
So far it's the size that it is. But I know it's meant to have a big reach. I know that I'm best when I'm serving people like one to many. So events, speaking on podcasts. I don't do a lot of one-on-one coaching. I just kind of know that that's sort of like the way that I'm supposed to make a difference. But I also know that when people do build like that relationship with you, they listen to the podcast, they feel like they know you. It can feel like everything to have a one-on-one interaction with that person. So instead of worrying about the people who are feeling maybe like they're not getting that, or they don't get that opportunity, we don't get the picture that we get to take at the Powerhouse event, I focus on noticing people when I notice them. So here's what I mean by that. I remember there was a woman, beautiful woman, that I just noticed her last year at our Friday night kickoff party, and didn't get to say hi to her. I didn't know her. She was kind of newer to me, to the community. And then Saturday, I'm standing in the back of the room at our event, and there's a speaker on stage, and she walks by. I was coming back from the bathroom, and I just stopped her, and I was like, I just want you to know, your vibe, your energy, it's all just like, it's a yes for me. And like, thank you so much for being here. What's your name? Like, and that was it. That was the extent of it. The next day after the event, I got like a huge, long message from her just saying like, you have no idea what that meant, or how much I needed that in that moment. I had just gone out in the hallway. She had like a sick child who she felt so much guilt for being at the event while her child was like sick and someone else was taking care of them. And she's like, it just reminded me like, I've been hiding. Like, you saw me. And I think like for community builders, if you struggle with that, or if you have like this fear of, okay, yes, but I can't do that for every single person. Here's what I've learned from Taylor Swift is you don't have to be the person that she's seeing. You see how much she cares by the fact that she sees and intentionally seeks out those moments with individuals. And one of the things that really left me with that feeling was there was a year where, I think I saw it on YouTube, or because before there was a lot of video on Instagram, so it must have been YouTube. There was a year where she picked like a group of fans, super fans, and gave them like individual, very personalized Christmas gifts. So it wasn't just like, oh, here's a Taylor Swift t-shirt, which people would have been so thrilled by. She would like research like their cat's name. I'm sure her team did it, but it came across as though she really got to know them. Some of them she even showed up at their house and like delivered it, and then they had it like this whole video. So I'm sitting here, I'm not like so much of a super fan that I would have even like cared if Taylor Swift showed up on my doorstep with some bacon. Yeah. Right? But watching her see people in that way impacted me just as much as if I were one of the people receiving the gift. So it's like just remembering that the intentionality with one-to-one, even as the community grows. So it would be very interesting to interview her on community, because I think of her as someone who I want to model the way that she's scaled such a huge community. Yeah. And still you feel how much she cares.
Lindsey, I needed to hear that, because this is something we've been talking about a lot, and Stacey's like nodding furiously, because I feel like I've been doing so much connecting, and I have so much guilt about keeping up these connections, because I'm a one-to-one person, like, and like someone can tell me something and I remember everything about them, and like I like want to maintain that connection, and I like, but then it's like so hard to keep alive when you're meeting like 100 new people every week, and you're like, you know, building this community. And I feel similarly, I feel like our calling is like to build something big, and it might not mean one-on-one. And so thank you for that. And I just want to say firstly, thank you so much for this, because I know that this is, you had shared with me that this is like a season that you're not doing a lot of podcast interviews because you've got a lot on the go. And so the fact that you made an exception and you're here today, like, means the world to me. And I'm just so excited to be part of your kind of like periphery of your community as well. And see you.
Oh, no, you're in. You're in the game. We need to get you the jacket, the whole thing. Like, you're in.
Oh,
my
gosh. The code for the bacon.
I do have the code for the bacon. I can put that in the show notes for everyone. But only your husband benefits, I think.
We all rise together.
Yeah. We're a squad over here. We'll be making bacon in no time. But I just want to thank you. But I also wanted to give you the opportunity as well to talk a little bit about how someone could like join your community, come to your event, and kind of get into your world, because it's amazing. And like, Lindsey, I think you do have the Taylor Swift effect.
You do, absolutely.
And like, when people talk about you, it is with the highest regard and respect for the way that you show up. And so, I just wanted to share that with you, that I think you're closer to Taylor than you might know.
Maybe it's now the Lindsey Schwartz effect.
Yeah, done.
Yes.
She just emulates it.
Yeah. Could you imagine? We ask her, we're like, who would you want on your podcast, Taylor? She's like, oh, do you know Lindsey Schwartz?
If I could only. Thank you. So that's so generous, and honestly, I just have always been a fan of yours from afar, and that's the cool thing about social media and getting to build digital communities is, you know, you do get to build real relationships with people. So this was so fun to get to do it in person, and I cannot wait to do it again. So honestly, I mean, since we're talking about the event, it really is a day not to be missed. I'm very biased, so take this for what it is, but you know, it's for the person who knows they're meant for more, and you might be already pursuing that. You might be just sitting there with an idea or not even knowing what that idea is, but it's the place that we have intentionally curated where you will be celebrated for your wildest big dreams, but you'll also be met with that authenticity piece of hearing from women who, I mean, I've looked up to for decades, who are really actually crushing it in the entrepreneurial space, but are willing to share their struggles and their failures too. You just kind of leave knowing that you're like, okay, I can do this. I really can. And that's why we say we're not meant to do business or life alone. So August 25th and 26th in Scottsdale is when that's going down, and all of our stuff is linked. Probably the easiest place is just go to the Powerhouse Women Instagram. It's just powerhouse_women, and you can find all the goods there.
Awesome. Lindsey, I'll put all of that in the show notes. I'll also put a link for folks to join the Girl Gang, because you also provide so much value there too. And the training is in there are so great. The co-working, like, there's lots of amazing people in there. So Lindsey, thank you again. And thank you so much to everyone who's listening. I know I always say this, but it's busy, and I know the time that you spend with me is really probably something you could be doing something else, and I appreciate that you're spending the time with us. So let Lindsey know what is a takeaway from this episode, and keep on building your digital community. Thanks so much for listening to the Build Your Digital Community podcast. If you loved the episode, please don't forget to rate us and leave us a review. Now, we'd love for you to be a part of our digital community. Text JOIN to 855-908-4688 to join our text list for exclusive social media tips, or DM us on Instagram at The Social Snippet, letting us know what you loved about the episode. Keep on building community, and to this and so much more.